The shuttle door opened onto a world that smelled like cold iron and old thunder. And the first thing the Academy of Apex Disciplines learned about humans was that they did not stop walking when the wind hit them. Everything else came later. The moon was called Kesh, and it hung under a bruise-colored gas giant that filled a third of the sky, and it had been chosen 400 years ago because it was hostile in every direction at once. Thin air, killing cold at night, a furnace at noon, canyons that went down farther than any species had bothered to measure. The Concord's finest hunting peoples sent their best young there, 1 in 1,000, to be broken and reassembled into something the galaxy could point at and say, "That is what the top of the food chain looks like when it goes to school." Cadet Wren Sotelo was 19 years old, 1 meter 66, and she was carrying her own duffel because nobody had offered to carry it for her. She came down the ramp into wind that was doing its best to tip her over. It shoved. She leaned. It shoved harder. She leaned harder, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and kept going. At the bottom of the ramp stood the Academy's intake proctor. He was 3.5 meters of ambulatory geology. Irving, plated slate gray, built along the general architecture of a landslide that had decided to become a person. His name was Commandant Vosk Thren, and he had been receiving cadets on that landing apron for 61 years, and in that time he had welcomed hatchlings of the Draka, whelps of the Silkwes, fledged killers of the Threshi, and the pale, silent spiderlings of the Noct. He had never once been surprised. He looked at Wren Sotelo. He looked at his slate. He looked at Wren Sotelo again. "You are lost," he said. His voice came out of somewhere below the floor of hearing and worked its way up. "This is a military installation. The civil exchange terminal is on the orbital. You will reboard." "I don't think I am, sir." She dug in her coat and produced a folded, much-abused hard copy because her parents had raised her to always bring the paper version. "Sotelo, Wren, species designation Homo sapiens, Sol 3, intake cycle 411. I got the acceptance packet 11 weeks ago. It had a wax seal. I thought that was a nice touch." Thren took the paper. It looked like a receipt in his hand. He read it. The wind screamed and gave up and went to scream somewhere else. "This is an error," said Commandant Thren. "Okay," said Wren. "Whose?" He did not answer, because the honest answer was asterisk, not mine asterisk. And Thren had a policy of never saying things that were both true and useless. What had happened, as the Academy's Board of Instruction would establish over the following 40 hours of increasingly bad-tempered inquiry, was this. Applications to the Academy were not written. They were classified. Every intake cycle, the Concord's registry of predatory taxa ran its species profiles through an old, stubborn, extremely literal piece of software called the Index, and the Index assigned every sapient people a predation rating on 11 criteria, and the Academy took its cadets from the top of that list. It had always taken its cadets from the top of that list. The list did not change, because species did not change, and so for 4 centuries the Index had been less a piece of software than a piece of furniture. Humanity had joined the Concord 9 years earlier and filed a species profile, as required, and the profile had sat in the registry gathering the electronic equivalent of dust. In cycle 411, the Index got around to reading it. And the Index did something no living being on the board had ever seen it do. It had rated the species eligible. Not high, not top of list, but over the line, over the bright hard line that separated asterisk apex from asterisk everything else. And it had done so on the basis of criteria that the board, in emergency session, went through one by one with the expressions of people examining a bill they were sure they had already paid. Dentition, laughable. Closure speed, worse than laughable. Claws, none. Venom, none. Armor, an insult. Sensory acuity, adequate vision, poor scent. Hearing, that was frankly rude to call hearing. And then, at the bottom of the profile, In the fields almost nobody scored on because almost nobody could. Sustained pursuit capability, unbounded. Thermal load tolerance under exertion, exceptional. Ranged accuracy unaided limb, exceptional. Tool integration, native. Cooperative predation, obligate. It's a filing error, said Instructor Kesra, who was threshy, who was 2 meters of feathered raptor-shaped contempt, and who had opinions about most things. The index has been parsing a field. That is all. Correct the field and send the creature home. Commandant Wren, at the head of the table, said nothing for a long moment. The index, he said finally, is not permitted to be wrong. Neither is it permitted to be overruled. If we expel this cadet without cause, the registry will ask us for cause, and we will have to write it down. He tapped one plated finger on the table. So we will not expel her. We will simply run the intake cycle as we always do. Kesra's crest went up. It took her a moment to understand, and then it took her another moment to enjoy it. Ah, she said. 4 weeks, said Wren. Every cadet who cannot meet the standard removes themselves. That is the standard. It has never failed. And so the Academy of Apex Disciplines admitted one human by mistake, and then set about correcting the mistake in the way it corrected everything, by pointing the mountain at her and waiting. Barracks 9 was carved into the rock of the ridge, a long hall of stone alcoves with the wind moaning through slots cut high in the walls, because the academy believed that comfort was a kind of dulling and dullness got you eaten. Wren stood in the doorway with her duffel and did a slow inventory of her new cohort. 19 cadets, every one of them, in the terminology of 900 worlds, an apex predator, and every one of them looking at her. The Draka took up most of the left side of the hall, long saurian ambush hunters, deep-chested, with heavy jaws and the eerie stillness of things that had evolved to be mistaken for driftwood. Their leader by weight and volume was a young male named Torvath, 2.5 meters of muscle with a scar through one nostril, and the untroubled confidence of somebody who had never once had to wonder whether he could win a fight. The Silkwests were on the right, 4 of them, sleek and gray and unnervingly synchronized. Their eldest was called Silishan, and she had the flat, evaluating gaze of an accountant with claws. 3 Threshy roosted on the upper ledge, all beak and eye and folded wing. And in the deepest corner, wedged into a shadow, was something with too many limbs and not enough noise. A knocked, pale and thin-legged, hunkered so far back into the alcove that Wren almost missed her. That was Nith. Nith would not say a word for 11 days. Torvath uncoiled off his bunk and crossed the floor, and the floor felt him do it. "They've sent us a snack," he said. The Draka laughed. Draka laughter was a low clicking in the throat, and 19 throats did it at once, and Wren felt the sound in her sternum like a hand pressing. She put her duffel on the empty bunk. She turned around. She looked up, a long way up, at a mouth that could have closed around her head, and she did the thing that would be reported later in 3 separate written statements as the first genuinely strange thing about her. She smiled. It was not a challenge. It was not a snarl. Every species in that room understood a bared teeth display. Every species in that room used one. What none of them had ever seen was a small, unarmed, unarmored biped bare its useless flat teeth at a thing 4 times its mass in an expression of asterisk friendliness, and then extend one hand, palm empty, fingers open, the most defenseless configuration a limb could take. "Wren," she said, "Sotelo, and you're right, I probably am a snack, but I'd rather be a roommate." Torvath stared at the hand. The hand did not go away. Torvath had confronted many things in his young life, and every one of them had done something. This one just waited asterisk, and the waiting went on, and it began, subtly, in a way he could not have explained, to feel less like submission, and more like the hand was simply going to stay there until the universe rearranged itself into a shape where taking it made sense. He turned and walked away, which was, all things considered, a victory, though nobody in the room knew it yet. The first week was designed to be a woodchipper. Kesra ran it, and Kesra ran it with enthusiasm. Day 1 was the closure yard, a 100-meter run to a padded target timed to the 100th. It measured the thing every apex species cared about most, how fast you could cross the distance between wanting and having. The Draka came off the line like a rock slide. The Silkwes arrived in a flowing gray blur, 4 bodies moving as one. The Threshy did not run at all. They took 2 steps and were simply their asterisk, wings snapping like a slammed door. Wren Sotelo ran 100 meters in 13.1 seconds. The record for the class was 3.4. There was no laughter this time. Laughter requires surprise. There was only a kind of collective settling, the sound of 19 predators putting an unimportant fact into a drawer and closing the drawer, and Kesra wrote a number on her slate and did not bother to speak. Day 2 was the strike drill, and Wren could not strike. Her hands were soft. Her nails were a joke. She hit the resistance column, and the resistance column noted the event with polite indifference. Torvath, beside her, hit it, and the column's telemetry spiked so hard the diagnostic light went amber. Day 3 was scent tracking, and Wren failed it so completely that Kesra came over to inspect her face, personally, to see whether the nostrils were decorative. Day 4 was nocturnal acuity, and Wren, in a lightless canyon, walked directly into a wall. Day 5 was ambush concealment, and Wren was located by every single evaluator in an average of 9 seconds. By the end of the first week, the numbers on the board in the instruction hall told a story so simple it barely needed reading. 19 cadets, 18 of them clustered in a band near the top, and then a long, embarrassed white space, and then, at the very bottom, alone, a name. Kesra stood in front of the board on the 7th evening with the entire cohort assembled behind her, because the academy believed that shame was a teaching tool, and she read the numbers aloud in a voice like a knife being sharpened. Cadet Sotelo, she finished. You are last in every discipline this institution measures. Do you understand what that means? Yes, ma'am. Say it. It means I'm last in every discipline this institution measures. Somewhere in the ranks, a Threshy made a sound of pure delight. You will not be expelled, said Kesra, and she leaned down close enough that Wren could see the hairline serration on the edge of that beak. That is the cruelty of your situation. No one will do you the kindness of throwing you off this rock. You will simply be permitted to stand at the bottom of that board every week for 4 years until you go home of your own accord. Her head tilted. The Draka have a word for prey that keeps walking after it should have lain down. It is not a compliment. Wren looked at the board. She looked at it for a while. What's the word? She asked. Kesra blinked. What? The word, Wren said. For prey that keeps walking, I'd like to know it. I collect words. Behind her in the ranks, Torvath's head came up very slightly. Kesra straightened. The interview had gotten away from her somewhere, and she was not sure when. Dismissed, she said. That night, Wren Sotelo sat on the floor of Barracks 9 with her boots off and her feet blistered, raw, the skin gone at both heels, soaking in a basin of cold water she had carried up from the sump, and she began, with a needle from her kit and a length of thread, to sew. Torvath watched her from across the hall for 11 minutes before curiosity beat dignity. What is that? Moleskin. She held it up, a strip of gray fabric cut to a shape. Well, it's not. It's a patch off my old jacket lining, but it does the same thing. You put it where the boot rubs, and then the boot rubs it instead of you. Your feet are damaged. Yeah. Then you should not walk on them. That's not really an option, is it? She bit the thread. Her hands were steady and quick, and they did something with the needle that Torvath's eyes could not entirely follow, a small clever motion, over and under, 5 times, done. Draka hands were magnificent instruments for holding a thing still while you removed it from the world. They had never once threaded a needle. So instead I'm going to make my boots hurt less. Why? She looked up. Because tomorrow's the long march and it's 40 kilometers, and I want to finish it. Torvath's throat clicked the Draka equivalent of a snort. You will not finish it. Probably not, Wren agreed pleasantly and went back to sewing. And that, the probably, was the second strange thing, and it lodged in Torvath somewhere behind the ribs, and he lay awake for some time trying to work out why. Because he had told her she would fail, and she had agreed with him, and then she had asterisk kept preparing. A Draka who knew he would fail did not prepare. He conserved. He waited for a better moment, a better angle, a better day, because that was what an ambush predator asterisk was, a creature of the perfect instant, magnificent and patient and utterly unwilling to spend itself on a bad chance. To spend yourself on a chance you had already conceded was not courage. It was not even stupidity. It was something Torvath's language did not have a shape for, and the not having a shape for it kept him up until the wind changed at third watch. Across the hall in her alcove, wedged in the dark, the knocked cadet named Nith watched the human sleep with all 8 of her eyes and did not sleep at all. Knocked did not have good hearing. What they had instead was feeling, a fine sensitivity in the leg joints, tuned over 90 million years to the tremor of an approaching footfall, so exquisite that a knocked could tell you the mass of a creature 200 meters away through solid rock. Nith had been reading the human's footfalls all week, and there was something wrong with them. Not wrong. Regular. Every other cadet in Barracks 9 walked in bursts. Fast, slow, freeze, lunge, predator gaits, energy hoarded and then spent, the rhythm of an animal that lives or dies in 3 seconds. Even asleep they twitched. The human stride was a metronome. Kilometer after kilometer of it up the ridge, down the ridge, out to the sump and back, at exactly the same cadence, in exactly the same rhythm with exactly the same interval, hour upon hour upon hour, like something that had been wounded. Nith's leg joints had been telling her about it for 6 days, and she could not stop noticing, and she did not have a word for what it made her feel, and if she had spoken standard well enough to try, she would have said, "It is the sound of something coming that has not yet decided to stop." The long march began at dawn and was expected to be over by noon. 40 kilometers out along the spine, the ridge that ran east from the academy like the vertebrae of something enormous and dead, down into the salt bowl, across and back. It was not a race. It was, officially, an asterisk assessment of terrain competence. Unofficially, it was the class's favorite day, because 40 kilometers to an apex predator was not a march. It was a series of sprints with sightseeing in between. The Draka went out fast and low, tails counterweighting. The Silkwes flowed. The Threshy cheated in the sense that they flew, which was permitted, which everyone agreed was outrageous. Wren Sotelo went out at a walk. Not a stroll. A specific, businesslike, slightly bent-kneed walk, arms swinging, chin level, with a stick in one hand that she had cut from a dead thornwood the night before and stripped and shaped for reasons that made sense only to her. She had a canteen on her hip and a second canteen in her pack, and a strip of cloth around her head to catch sweat before it reached her eyes. Kesra, riding the observation skiff, looked down at the small figure trudging along the ridgeline and felt something that was not quite pity. "She will fall out at 12, said Kesra to the pilot. "Mark it." At 12 kilometers, the human was still walking. At 12 kilometers, the Draka had stopped. This was not a failure. This was Draka doctrine, and it was written into the muscle. Run hard, then cool. Torvath's people carried their heat in their mass, and their mass was enormous, and a Draka at full lope was a furnace with legs. So they stopped in the shade of a shelf of rock and lay flat against the cold stone with their throats spread, bleeding heat into the ground, exactly as they had done for 100,000 generations, exactly as they would do 3 more times before the salt bowl. Torveth, chin on the rock, watched the small biped come up the trail toward them. She did not stop. She said, "Morning," as she went past, in a voice that was not even out of breath, and she kept walking, and the sound of her boots went crunch, 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 that metronome again, and got smaller and did not change. Nobody said anything. There was nothing to say. She was going to burn out. That was simply what happened to small things that spent themselves early. They would pass her in an hour and find her sitting in her own shadow with her mouth open, and that would be that. They passed her in an hour. They found her 40 minutes later, still walking. They passed her again at kilometer 22, and this time it cost them, because the bowl was heating up and the salt threw the light back into the sky and the air over the flats had begun to shimmer and lie. The Draka ran and stopped and lay flat and could not cool because there was no shade in the salt bowl, because that was the entire point of the salt bowl. Torvath's tongue was out. His flanks were pumping. His vision had gone slightly gold at the edges and the gold was creeping in. Crunch, crunch, crunch. She went past him at the 24th kilometer, and he tried to get up and could not, immediately. And by the time she was 90 meters on and had not looked back. Silashan of the Silkwes ran her pack past the human at 28. The Silkwes were built for this, or thought they were. They ran relay, rotating the lead so each runner rested in the slipstream of the others, which was as close as any species at the academy came to what the index called asterisk cooperative predation. They were proud of it. It was taught as an advanced technique. They rotated for 6 kilometers, and then Silashan noticed that the rotations were coming faster, because each runner was lasting less time in the lead, because the bowl was 41 degrees and rising, and her people were built for the cold woods of a world that had never had a place like this. At 34 kilometers, Silashan called a halt and lay down in the white salt with her pack around her and her chest going like a bellows, and the human walked past. She was not fast. That was the thing Silashan could not get her mind around, then or later. She was not fast, she was not strong, she was not cool. She was drenched, streaming, sweat running off her jaw and dripping onto the salt in a steady trail, which was a catastrophic and suicidal loss of water, which was the sort of thing that killed animals. And she was not slowing down. She was, in fact, doing something worse. Silashan watched it happen, and her hackles came up along her spine without any permission from her at all. The human had begun to look around. Not the head-down grind of an animal in its last extremity. She was scanning the bowl. She stopped once. For 11 seconds, Silashan counted them to pick up a chunk of salt crust, turn it over, look at it, and put it in her pocket. Then she drank 2 swallows of water, capped the canteen, wiped her face, and resumed walking at exactly the same cadence, as if the last 34 kilometers had been a hallway. She was not surviving the salt bowl. She was commuting through it. Wren Sotelo came up the last rise to the academy gate at 4 hours and 51 minutes. She was not first. 2 Threshy had flown it, and 11 cadets had come in ahead of her in the last hour, staggering, heat-drunk, hauled the final stretch by their own furious pride. But she had not been carried, and she had not stopped, and when Commandant Thren's medical officer scanned her at the gate, the readout said her core temperature was 37.4 degrees. Normal. It said *normal. Half the cohort was still coming in when she reached the yard. She turned around and looked back down the trail, and then she did the third strange thing, the one that went into the written record, the one that Kesra could not later explain to the board without her crest rising. She walked back down. Nobody had ordered it. There were no points for it. She walked back down the trail 3 kilometers in the worst hour of the day, on a pair of feet that had lost most of their skin, and she found Torveth of the Draka on his side in the shade of a boulder with his eyes gone gold and his tongue in the dust, at the exact point where his enormous, magnificent, perfectly evolved body had finally informed him that it was done. She sat down next to him. He was too far gone to bite her, which he wanted to do badly. She soaked her headcloth in her second canteen and laid it across the great scaled slab of his throat, where the blood ran close to the surface. She did it again when it went warm. She did it 11 times patiently, saying nothing much, occasionally observing that the view was nice. Then she got him up. She did not carry him. She could no more have carried him than carried the boulder. But she walked in front of him at a pace he could hold, and she did not once let the gap between them get bigger than 4 meters. They came up through the gate together at 6 hours and 2 minutes, which put Torveth last in the class, which was a humiliation he had never in his life imagined he would have to survive. He stood in the yard swaying. The human handed him her canteen. "That's the rest of my water," she said. "You need it more than I do, and anyway I'm about to go stand under a shower, which is essentially cheating." Then she limped off toward the barracks, and left him standing there holding a container of water, in front of the entire cohort, with absolutely no idea what had just been done to him. Draka did not share water. It was not that they were cruel. It was that in the swamp deltas of Draka, water was the one thing that could not be taken by force from anything that had it, because anything that had it was already in it, and so offering water was a gesture with no meaning, an offer of a thing that was either everywhere or nowhere. On Kesh, water was rationed to the gram. Torveth looked at the canteen. He looked at the human's back. "Why," he said, "to nobody in Draka," and it came out cracked. By the second week, the whispering had started, and it was not the kind of whispering Kesra had planned for. She had expected mockery. She got questions. "Instructor," Silashan, after the morning brief, ears flat, "I would like to know why an unarmed, slow biped can operate at 41 degrees for 5 hours without heat failure when I cannot operate for 2. Kesra's crest came up. "You are asking me why you lost a walk to a snack." "Yes, instructor," said Silashan, with perfect calm, and did not look away. And there was something in her flat gray eyes that Kesra did not like at all, because it was not shame. It was professional interest. The answer, of course, was in the registry file that the board had spent 40 hours pretending not to have read. Humans did not cool by lying on rocks. Humans did not cool by panting, or by seeking shade, or by simply being large enough to soak up the day and dump it at night. Humans cooled by sweating over the entire surface of a body that had, for reasons that struck every other sapient species in the Concord as somewhere between baffling and obscene, largely dispensed with fur. They were, functionally, walking radiators. Every hunting species in the galaxy had built its body around the sprint, because the sprint was where the eating happened. Humans had built their bodies around the hour, around the 3rd hour, around the *9th. They had made a machine whose only real specialty was that it did not have to stop, and then they had gone out onto the savannah and simply followed things until the things fell down. There was a word for it in the registry file. Silashan found it eventually, 4 weeks later, in an unsecured taxonomy appendix, and she read it 3 times, and then she sat very still for a while. Persistence hunting. Definition: the pursuit of prey over distances and durations sufficient to induce terminal exhaustion in the prey. Weapons: optional. Speed: irrelevant. Requirement: the hunter must be willing to continue. The waiting was the Academy's oldest examination and its most beautiful, and it was the one every cadet arrived expecting to win. It went like this. Each cadet was assigned a shallow scrape in the rock of the culverts, the network of dry channels under the spine, and each cadet was given a single target, a pressure plate at the mouth of the channel that would trip only when a Kesh cave shrike, a small, jittery, absurdly cautious flying thing, landed on it to drink. The shrike would come. The shrike always came. But the shrike would not come while it could see you, or smell you, or hear you, or sense the heat of you. And the shrike had 11 separate senses for being lied to. And it had been lied to by the finest ambush predators in the galaxy for 400 years, and had gotten very good at not believing them. The exercise ended when the shrike landed, or when the cadet moved. The Academy record was 6 hours and 10 minutes, set by a Draka in the year of the Long Ash, and it was carved into the lintel above the culvert entrance, and every cohort walked under it on the way in and looked up. Torvath went into the culverts on the morning of the 14th day, intending to break it. He was born for this. Every fiber of him was born for this. The Draka were the finest ambushers the Conquered had ever produced, creatures who could go into a state that was not quite sleep and not quite waking, heart rate down to 9, jaw open, utterly motionless, becoming a shape in the water that other shapes swam past. He got 4 hours and 40 minutes. At 4 hours and 40 minutes his left hind foot cramped, and he shifted it 3 centimeters, and a shrike 200 meters up the channel. A shrike he could not see, had never seen, would never see, decided the world had changed and did not come. He came out of the culverts furious, and he was still furious an hour later, and he was still furious at dusk, and at dusk he realized that the human had not come out. He went to the culvert mouth. Kesra was there with her slate, and her crest was flat, which on a threshy meant something quite different from calm. "Where is she?" said Torvath. "Blind 11, said Kesra, "where she has been since dawn." That is, he did the arithmetic. 11 hours. 11 hours and 20 minutes. The shrike has not come. The shrike, said Kesra, and her voice was very level, came at 9 hours and 40 minutes and landed, and the plate tripped, and the exercise ended. She did not look up from the slate. She has not moved. Torvath stared at her. "She has not come out," Kesra said. "The exercise is over. The record is broken. It was broken 3.5 hours ago, and she is still lying in a scrape in the rock in the dark, and I have sent 2 runners, and both of them report that she is conscious and breathing and awake and looking at the ceiling, and when they spoke to her she said—" Kesra stopped. "Said what?" Kesra's beak clicked once. "She said, 'Tell them I'll come out when the exercise is finished. I don't want to spook the second one.'" Torvath's throat worked. "The second what?" "There is no second one," said Kesra. "There has never been a second one. There is 1 shrike and 1 plate, and the exercise is complete." She finally looked up, and the yellow of her eye had gone very wide. She does not know that. She has not been told that. So she has decided that the exercise might not be over, and she is going to keep lying in the dark, in the cold, without water, on the possibility that there is more to do. The wind came down the culvert and went over both of them. "How long," Torvath said slowly, "will she stay there?" And Kesra, Instructor Kesra of the Threshi, who had killed on 4 worlds, who had once held a nest against a pack of adult Draka and won, who had never in her life been afraid of a mammal, did not answer, because the honest answer had just arrived in her mind fully formed, and she did not want to say it out loud. "Until we go and get her. She will stay there until we go and get her." Wren Sotelo came out of blind 11 at 14 hours and 6 minutes on her own, when the cold got serious enough that she judged it a genuine hazard. She was stiff. She was blue at the lips. She walked out under the lintel with the carved record on it, and she did not even look up at it, because she did not know it was there, because nobody had told her, and she went and got some soup. The next morning, the maintenance staff carved a new number into the lintel, because that was the rule, and the rule was very old. 14 hours, 6 minutes. Sotelo, W. Homo sapiens. 19 cadets walked under it on their way to morning drill, and every single one of them looked up. And not one of them laughed. The Academy of Apex Disciplines had a founding principle, and it was carved over the main gate in 9 languages, and it said, "The Apex stands alone. It was not a slogan. It was doctrine, and doctrine at Kesh was closer to physics than to policy. Every apex species in the conquered had arrived at the top of its food web by being sufficient, by needing nothing, borrowing nothing, and above all sharing nothing. Because the thing at the top of a food web that shares is a thing with a competitor, and a competitor is a thing you have to fight, and a fight is a wound, and a wound is death by a slower road. Draka hunted alone, Threshy hunted alone, and their pair bonds were negotiated truces with clauses. Even the Silkwes, who ran in packs the way a corporation is a group of people, a temporary alignment of separate hungers with a ledger, and an understanding that the ledger settled at the kill. So when the Academy set the gauntlet, 3 days in the culverts, a course of 11 obstacles, cadets released at 10-minute intervals, individually scored. Nobody expected anything except 18 separate hunts and one small biped falling in a hole. The gauntlet was where it all broke. Obstacle 4 was the crossing, a 9-meter gap over a channel with a 200-meter drop, no bridge, no rope, walls too smooth to climb. The Draka solution was the leap. The Threshy solution was contemptuous. The Silkwes solution was a running jump with a wall kick, and it worked mostly. Wren Sotelo stood at the edge of the crossing for 6 minutes. Then she went back 40 meters, to a place where the culvert wall had partially collapsed some decades ago, and she selected 3 lengths of reinforcing rod from the rubble, and carried them back, and wedged the first into a crack in the rock at an angle, and hammered it home with a stone, and tested it with her weight, and laid the second across it, and lashed the joint with cord cut from her own pack straps, with a knot that took her 9 seconds and did not slip. It took her 51 minutes. She walked across the gap on a bridge. The evaluator on Obstacle 4, a bored technician who had watched 400 cadets leap that gap, put down his cup and stood up and did not sit back down for the rest of the day. Obstacle 7 was the reach, a keystone set in a recess 3 meters overhead, which had to be dislodged to open the next section. Draka reared and struck it. Threshy flew up and hooked it. The Silkwes made a living ladder of themselves, which was the closest thing to teamwork the gauntlet had ever seen, and everyone thought it was very clever. Wren picked up a rock. She weighed it in her hand. She swapped it for a slightly smaller, denser one. She stepped back. She turned her body side on, dropped her weight into her back foot, brought her arm up and back, the shoulder rotating in a way no shoulder in that culvert was built to rotate, a joint that was less a joint than a sling asterisk, the single most absurd and specialized piece of anatomy any of them had ever seen on a creature that could not fly. And the rock left her hand at 98 kilometers an hour and hit the keystone dead center. The keystone came out, the section opened, total elapsed time 11 seconds. Torvath, watching from the rest platform above, went completely, entirely still. He was not still because he was impressed, although he was. He was still because his brain had just done something it did involuntarily, at the deepest level, the way it did when a shadow moved wrong in water. It had run the geometry. And it had produced a conclusion, and the conclusion was, she could have done that to me. From there, and I would not have been able to reach her. Every predator at that academy had spent its entire life inside one law, so basic that none of them had ever thought to name it. To hurt a thing, you must be next to it. The whole science of predation, the ambush, the stalk, the closure, the sprint, was a science of solving the problem of asterisk distance. Distance was the prey's only friend. Distance was the thing you spent your body to erase. Humans had not erased distance. Humans had kept asterisk distance, and reached across it anyway, and been doing so for so long that the reaching had gotten into their asterisk bones asterisk. Torvath sat down on the platform, quite hard. But it was Obstacle 11 that did the real damage, and Obstacle 11 was not an obstacle at all. It was a mistake. The culvert roof came down at 3:40 on the 3rd day. A slab, half a ton, no warning. The kind of thing that happened on Kesh once every few years and was written up and forgotten. It came down across the throat of a side channel, and it pinned Nith of the Noct against the wall by 2 of her 8 legs, and it did not crush her, because Noct legs were mostly chitin and air, but it held her, and she could not get free, and she was 400 meters into a dead-end channel that nobody had any reason to enter. Noct did not scream. Noct had no throat for it. What Nith had was her drumming, the ancient, useless, hardwired distress signal of her people, a rapid tapping of the forelimbs against stone, which on her homeworld carried through the root mats of the deep forest for 2 kilometers and summoned absolutely nobody, because Noct did not come when other Noct drummed. They came later to see what had been left behind. She drummed anyway, because 90 million years said you did. She drummed for 11 minutes into an empty channel, in the dark, under a slab, on a moon where the temperature at 340 was -19. And then something came down the channel. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Wren Sotelo had been 200 meters away on the main line, and she had felt nothing and heard almost nothing, because human hearing was, as Kesra had noted for the record, frankly rude to call hearing. But she had heard something. A rhythm, a pattern, a thing that was not the wind, because the wind did not repeat itself in groups of 3. And humans, whatever else was wrong with them, were pattern-crazed. They saw faces in rocks. They heard voices in static. They had a defect, a great glorious defect, that made them assume that any rhythm in the dark was somebody, and they went to look every time, and 9 times out of 10 it was nothing, and the 10th time it was Nith. Nith felt her coming through her leg joints from 180 meters out and could not process what she was feeling, because the footfalls were not slowing, they were not stalking, they were not approaching in any sense her species had a template for. They were hurrying. Something in the dark was hurrying toward a distress signal. The human came around the bend with her lamp up, and stopped, and said one word, O*. In a tone Nith had never heard from any living creature, and would spend the rest of her life trying to describe. And then the human did not go for help. She did not leave. She dropped her pack and knelt and put her hand bare, unarmored, right up against the mandibles of a pinned and terrified Noct, which was the single most suicidally stupid gesture available in the entire catalog of conquered behavior, flat on Nith's carapace, and said, Okay, I've got you. Don't move, I'm going to get you out. The slab weighed 480 kilograms. Wren Sotelo weighed 61. She looked at it for 8 seconds. Then she went back down the channel and came back with one of the reinforcing rods from Obstacle 4, and a rock about the size of a curled fist, and she jammed the rock up against the base of the slab, and she laid the rod across it, and she got the end of the rod under the slab's lip, and she leaned. The slab moved 4 centimeters. It moved 4 centimeters because a rod, a rock, and 61 kilograms of primate had just conspired to become a machine, and the machine multiplied the primate by 9, and the mathematics of the universe, which do not care about claws or jaws or venom or armor, or 400 years of doctrine carved over a gate, quietly did what they were asked. Nith pulled her legs free. The human dropped the rod and caught her as she came off the wall, which was ridiculous because Nith masked her, and they both went down in a tangle in the dark, and the human laughed in a collapsing culvert at -19 degrees and said, Sorry. That was okay. Are you hurt? Can you walk? Nod if do you nod? I don't actually know if you nod. Nith nodded. Nith had learned to nod 11 days earlier by watching this creature do it. And then the human took off her own thermal overlayer and wrapped it around a Noct's abdomen where the cold was worst, and got under Nith's shoulder joint, and the two of them walked 400 meters up the dead channel and out into the main line and back to the gauntlet entrance. And the human score for Obstacle 11 was recorded as *0, did not attempt, and she did not mention it to anyone, not once, not ever. Kesra found out from the culvert telemetry 3 days later. She watched the recording 11 times. Then she went to the commandant's office and stood in front of his desk with her wings clamped tight to her body and said, "Sir, I would like to formally withdraw my recommendation." Wren looked up from his slate. "Which recommendation?" "That we break her, sir." Kesra's crest was completely flat. "I no longer believe we can, and I have begun to think that we should be extremely careful about continuing to try." The cohort found out because the Noct told them. Nith had not spoken in the barracks for 11 days. On the 12th night she came down out of her alcove, which she had never done, and crossed the floor of Barracks 9, which she had never done, and stood in the middle of the room among 19 apex predators, which no Noct in the history of her species had ever voluntarily done, and she said, in standards so poor it took her 4 tries. She lifted the roof. "Silence." "She is not strong," said Nith. "I am stronger, you are stronger." "She is not strong." Her forelimbs made a small helpless gesture. She lifted the roof. And she went back to her alcove. Nobody slept much. The unease came on like weather. It was not that they were frightened of being hurt. Nobody at that academy had ever been frightened of being hurt. Being hurt was a Tuesday. It was that every cadet in Barracks 9 had spent their entire life with a working model of the universe in their head, and the model had a category called asterisk predator and a category called asterisk prey, and every living thing they had ever met went into one or the other, and the human would not go in either. Prey ran, she didn't run. Prey hid, she built. Predators closed, she kept her distance and threw. Predators conserved. She spent endlessly, calmly, on things that had no payoff, on other people's problems, on a Draka she didn't like, on a Noct she'd never spoken to, and she did it as though the spending were not a cost at all, as though the ledger they had all been keeping since the first cell ate the second cell were simply not a document she had ever been given. Silashan put it best in the Silkwest mess, at the low table, with her pack around her and her voice pitched so it went no further. "I have been trying," she said, "to work out what she is doing, because everything she does asterisk slowly asterisk and badly, and she loses. She lost the closure yard. She lost the strike drill. She loses every single event we have ever run." Her ears flattened. "And I have just gone back and looked at the board. Cumulative standing, cycle to date." She put her slate on the table. Her pack looked. Wren Sotelo was 11th out of 19. She had gone from dead last to asterisk 11th, past 2 Threshy and 4 Draka and one of Silashan's own without ever once, in 11 weeks, winning anything. "How?" said one of her pack. "She does not win," said Silashan. "She asterisk finishes, every time, every event, every distance, every trial." She was quiet for a moment. "And it turns out that if you simply finish and everyone else is winning and losing, then over a long enough cycle you will pass them all because they are the ones who fall out." She pushed the slate away. "I do not know how to compete with a thing that does not care about winning," she said. "My people have 140 words for the moment a hunt is decided. She has never had one of those moments. She just keeps asterisk going, and it is not decided, and it is not decided, and then it turns out that it was decided a long time ago and nobody was told." One of her pack, young, brash, still recovering his pride from the salt bowl, clicked his teeth. "It's a mammal asterisk. It's 90 kilos of—" "61, said Silashan. "Of soft, hairless, half-blind." 61 kilos, said Silashan very quietly, that walked 40 kilometers through the bowl and then went back for someone. Her packmates, who had been raised from birth to read the smallest movement of her ears, went absolutely still. Think about what that is, not the going back. If we had run our brothers into the ground in the bowl, we would have left them. Doctrine, correct doctrine, my asterisk doctrine. Her voice did something complicated. And I have been sitting here for 2 hours trying to imagine what it would be like to belong to a pack that came back for me asterisk. And I find that I cannot. And I find that I want to. And I do not like what that says about my pack. Nobody answered her. Across the mess, at a table by herself, the human was doing something with a piece of wire and a broken lamp housing, tongue between her teeth, entirely absorbed, humming a small tune that none of them could identify, because it was not a threat display, and it was not a mating call, and it was not a territorial marker. It was just a song. She was just asterisk humming. Torvath, 3 tables away, watched her, and felt the thing that had been building in him for 11 weeks finally arrive and sit down and give its name. It was not hatred. He tried that, it hadn't fit. It was not fear exactly, although there was some in it. It was the feeling of a creature who has spent his whole life being the most dangerous thing in every room he enters, and who has just realized, all at once, with total clarity, that he has been standing next to something for 11 weeks that would have followed him for a asterisk week if it had wanted to. Not run him down, followed him, walked at that horrible even pace behind him, through the night, through the next day, through the next night, while he sprinted and stopped and cooled and sprinted and stopped, until his body simply put itself down. And then knelt beside him, and laid a wet cloth on his throat, and got him up, and walked him home. Torvath of the Draka pushed his food away. He was not afraid of being killed by her. He was afraid deeply, coldly, in a place he did not have a word for, of what it would feel like to be saved by her, over and over forever, and to never once be able to pay it back. The board of instruction convened in the 11th week, and it did not go the way Kesra expected. She had come prepared to defend the human. She had brought the culvert telemetry. She had brought the thermal logs from the long march. She had brought, God help her, a written recommendation that Cadet Sotelo be advanced to the second-year syllabus, which was the first positive recommendation Kesra had written in 9 years, and which had taken her 4 hours and 2 false starts. She never got to read it. The cohort, said Provost Sathe Vern, is degrading. Vern was threshy, like Kesra, and old, and had run the Academy's doctrinal syllabus for 30 years, and had the unhurried manner of a person who has never had to raise her voice, because she has never been in a room where the outcome was in doubt. Degrading how, Provost, said Commandant Thrin. Cadet Torvath of the Draka was observed, 4 days ago, assisting Cadet Nith of the Noct over the reach. Vern let that sit. Assisting, a Draka, assisting a Noct. There is no scoring category for it. There has never needed asterisk to be a scoring category for it. She turned a page she did not need to turn. Cadet Silishan has petitioned to run the closure yard as a relay, sharing her time with a slower cadet, on the grounds that, I am quoting, a pack speed is the speed of its last runner. That is not doctrine. That is a cadet who has stopped being able to see the question. Kesra's crest lifted very slightly. Provost, with respect, Cadet Silishan's cohort scores have risen 11% since. I am aware of the scores. Vern's voice did not change at all, and that was the frightening part. The scores are an asterisk measurement of the institution, and if the measurement rises while the institution rots, then the measurement is broken. In 400 years, we have never graduated a cadet who did not stand alone. Everything the conquered relies on us for is built on that. And in 11 weeks, one soft-skinned mammal with no teeth has taught the finest young predators in the galaxy that it is acceptable to need each other. She looked around the table. I do not care whether she is capable. I am telling you that she is contagious. Nobody spoke. The Sunder trial, said Vern, is scheduled for the end of the cycle, as it always is. I move that Cadet Sotelo sit it early and alone and to the original specification. Kesra came half out of her chair. The original asterisk specification, is in the founding charter instructor and has never been repealed. It has never been asterisk used since the year of the long ash, because in the year of the long ash it killed 4 cadets. Then she will withdraw, said Provost Vern, which is what we want, and no one will be hurt at all. And that was the trap, and it was a good one, and everyone at the table saw it close. Because the Sunder trial in its modern form was hard but survivable, a cadet went out into the ashlands and got within touching distance of a gret 9 meters of armored grazing apex analog, blind, deaf, and possessed of a sense of ground vibration, so fine it could feel a heartbeat at 30 meters, and pressed a marker patch to its flank, and came home. It was a coup count, about nerve and stalking and reading an animal. Nobody killed the gret. They were the last of the great Kesh megafauna, and the Academy's real feeling about them was closer to reverence than anything else. The original asterisk specification, as written 400 years ago by founders who had been considerably less sentimental, added one clause. The cadet shall go unaided, unarmored, and without recall. The trial ends when the cadet returns, or when the cadet does not. No beacon, no pickup, no skiff on station. You walked out into the ashlands and you came back, or the ashlands kept you. Commandant Vosk Thren sat at the head of the table for a long time, 61 years. He thought about the human on the ramp, leaning into the wind. He thought about the lintel, with the new number on it. The board notes the motion, he said heavily. The board approves it. And then, before Kesra could speak, and the board records in the minutes over the provost's objection, that in the judgment of the commandant this trial is being convened not to test a cadet but to remove her asterisk, and that the commandant considers this a disgrace, and that he is complying with it because the charter permits it, and because he has run out of ways to say no. Vern's crest went up. Sir. Write it down, said Thren. They told her at the evening meal in front of everyone, because Vern understood theater. Wren Sotelo listened to the whole thing. She asked 2 questions. The first was how far, 400 kilometers out and back, and the second was when. Dawn, said Provost Vern. Unless you would prefer to withdraw, the form is on the table, it takes a moment. Okay, said Wren. And she went back to her soup, and Provost Vern stood there for 11 seconds waiting for something that did not come, and then walked out of a hall containing 19 apex predators, every single one of whom was watching the human and not her. That night was the worst night. Torvath found her at the top of the ridge, sitting on the rock above the salt bowl with her arms around her knees, looking east at the dark, and he sat down next to her, which took some doing, because the ledge had not been built with Draka in mind. She was crying. He did not know what it was. Draka wept in the way of any animal with an eye that needs washing. They had no idea what it meant to leak from the face because of an asterisk feeling. He watched it with alarm for a while, and then decided it was probably not fatal. You are afraid, he said. Yeah, she wiped her face on her sleeve. Yeah, I'm terrified. I'm 19, Tor. I'm 19 and I'm on a moon 4,000 light-years from anyone I love, and tomorrow they're going to walk me out into a desert and shut the gate. You can withdraw. There is no dishonor in it. The trial is not lawful. Everyone knows the trial is not lawful. Kesra, his throat clicked. Kesra asterisk has filed a protest. Kesra. I know. Then why? Wren was quiet for a long time. Down in the bowl the wind was moving salt around, and the gas giant had come up over the horizon and turned everything the color of an old bruise, and somewhere behind them the Academy's night bell rang the hour, as it had rung it for 400 years. Because I keep thinking about the index, she said. The what? The machine that let me in. Everyone says it made a mistake. She turned her head and looked at him, and her eyes were wet and absolutely steady. But it didn't Tor. That's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. It read my file, and it looked at all the things I don't have, the teeth and the claws and the speed, and then it looked at what's actually left, and it did the math, and it said asterisk yes. It said you were an apex predator. No, Wren shook her head. That's what your provost thinks it said. That's why she's so angry. She thinks the machine called me a lion. She pulled her knees in. It didn't. It looked at a hairless, weak, slow, half-blind primate with no natural weapons, and it noticed that we're still here, and that everything that could outfight us and outrun us and outbite us is in a museum, and it asked the only question that actually matters, which is asterisk how. Torveth waited. We don't win fights, Wren said. We just don't lose them yet, and then we don't lose them tomorrow, and we don't lose them the day after. And we're carrying water so we can go further, and we're carrying fire so we can go at night, and we're carrying each other asterisk so nobody drops out, and we made a stick sharp so the distance doesn't matter anymore, and every single one of those things is nothing asterisk. Tor, every one of them is asterisk pathetic on its own, her voice cracked, and you add them up over enough hours and the biggest, fastest, strongest thing on the planet lies down. The wind went over them. That's not a mistake, she said. That's just a kind of predator nobody in your Concord has ever had to think about, because you've all been so asterisk good at the fast version that you never needed the slow one. She scrubbed at her face again. And I'm going to go out there tomorrow, and I'm probably going to be so scared I throw up, and I'm going to do it anyway, because if I sign that form then everything they've said about my species is true, and I can't. She stopped. I don't want to be the reason they get to keep believing it, she finished. Torveth of the Draka sat on the cold rock beside her and looked out at the bowl. They have not asked asterisk us asterisk, he said, what we believe. He stood up. He was very large in the dark. Sleep, he said. You will walk a long way tomorrow. She walked out at dawn. The whole cohort came to the gate, which nobody had ordered and nobody could quite prevent. Provost Wren stood on the wall with her slate. The gate came up. The ashlands lay beyond it, 400 kilometers of black volcanic grit under a sky the color of a healing bruise, and the wind coming off it smelled like a struck match. Wren checked her pack one last time. 6 liters, rations for 4 days, a coil of cord, a knife, a folding shovel, the stripped thornwood stick which she had never once explained to anyone and which she carried like a person carries an old friend. Cadets Sotelo, said Provost Wren from the wall, the marker patch. Wren took it, orange, adhesive, about the size of her palm. Return with it applied, said Wren, or do not return. Wren looked up at her. And then witnessed and recorded and later played in a Concord hearing to a room of very senior people who did not know what to do with their faces. Cadet Wren Sotelo, aged 19, last in every discipline the institution measured, smiled at the provost of the Academy of Apex Disciplines and said, "See you in 6 days, ma'am." And she turned around and walked into the ashlands at exactly the same cadence she had used on the long march and on the spine, and up and down to the sump every night for 11 weeks, and the sound of her boots went crunch, crunch, crunch and got smaller, and did not change. Nith at the gate felt her go through the joints of all 8 legs, out past the perimeter, out past the sensor line, out to the edge of the range and further, and she stood there long after the others had drifted away, reading the tremor of a stride that would not vary, and she thought in the wordless, tactile, terrible clarity of her people. It will not stop. It has never once stopped. And whatever is out, there does not know that yet. What happened over the next 4 days is on the record, because the Academy's ashlands array logged every seismic footfall, and because afterward the board went through those logs the way people go through the wreckage of something they used to own. Day 1, 48 kilometers. She stopped at dusk, dug a scrape and slept. Day 2, 51 kilometers. She found Gret's sign at the 90th kilometer and did not follow it. She sat down and looked at the country for 2 hours and then walked asterisk away from the sign, southeast, at an angle, and the array logged it and nobody could think of a reason for it. Day 3, she found the herd. Not the animal. The herd 11 gret, moving slow across the black, and one of them a great old cow with a scar across her armor and a calf at her flank, and Wren Sotelo lay down on her belly on the rim of a ridge 2 kilometers away and watched them for 9 hours without moving, and then walked away and dug in and slept. Day 4, the array recorded that she began to walk with them. Not toward, not stalking. With 2 kilometers off the flank of the herd at their speed all day, keeping their pace, matching their rest, drifting in 100 meters closer at noon, 100 meters closer at dusk, so slowly that no animal on that plain could have told you the distance was changing at all, because the distance was changing at the speed a shadow moves. Kesra, watching the log come in, said out loud to an empty room, "She is not stalking them, she is joining them." And that was the day the HFY came. Kesh had a weather, and the weather had a name, and the name was said quietly. The HFY was the moon's temper, a wall of pulverized volcanic grit 600 meters high, driven at 90 kilometers an hour off the northern shield, blotting out heat, light, scent and sound and killing, reliably, every few years anything caught in the open. The Academy's storm sirens went at 1400 on day 4, which was more than enough time for every living thing behind the walls to get under stone. Except Cadet Wren Sotelo was 211 kilometers out in the ashlands with no beacon, no recall, and no skiff on station, because the trial was to the original specification, and the original specification said without recall. Commandant Wren was on his feet before the siren finished its first cycle. Launch the storm skiff. Provost Wren did not move from her chair. The charter. Launch the storm skiff. Forbids it, Commandant, and you know it forbids it, and if you launch you will void her trial and she will be expelled by operation of the charter, which is the outcome I have been requesting for 11 weeks. Wren's crest was flat. Her voice was calm. She had not raised it once in 30 years. Launch and you save her and you end her. Do not launch and she has an hour to find a hole. Those are the 2 doors. There is not a third. Wren stood in the center of the operations floor with his plated fists on the table, and 11 staff officers watched him, and outside the window the northern horizon had gone the color of dirty milk. Kesra said, very quietly, "Sir, there is a third." They all looked at her. She was standing at the door of the operations room, and she was not alone. Behind her, filling the corridor silent and gray, stood 19 cadets. Torvath of the Draka was at the front, and beside him Silishan of the Silkwest with her whole pack at her heels, and behind them the Threshy with their wings clamped down for the storm, and lowest and last, pressed to the wall, a Noct with 8 legs reading the floor. "The charter forbids the Academy from recovering her," said Kesra. "It says nothing whatsoever about her cohort." Provost Sathai Vern rose out of her chair very slowly. "You are proposing," she said, "that 19 cadets go into an HFY together, unsupervised, to retrieve a single member of their class." "Yes, Provost. That is not doctrine." Torvath of the Draka stepped forward. His head came up, and he looked down at the Provost of the Academy of Apex Disciplines from a height of 2.5 meters, and he said, in a voice like a door closing, "No, Provost, it is not." He was silent for a moment. "She went back for me in the bowl," he said, "and I have spent 11 weeks trying to find a way to explain that to myself using the words you gave me, and there are none, so I have decided that the words are wrong." His tail came around. "The apex stands alone. It is carved over the gate. I have read it every morning of my life here." He bared every tooth in his head. "Take it down." 211 kilometers out, Wren Sotelo had seen the storm 90 minutes before the sirens went, because She had been watching the northern horizon every hour for 4 days out of a habit her species had acquired somewhere on a grassland a very long time ago, and had never quite put down. She had 90 minutes. She had a folding shovel. There was a lava shelf 800 meters west with an undercut deep enough to dig into, and if she went now and dug hard, she would be under stone in 40 minutes with 50 in hand, and she would live. She stood there and did the arithmetic, and it came out clean. Then she turned and looked east at the Gret. They had felt the storm before she had. Gret were blind, genuinely, completely blind, eyes long since abandoned as a bad investment, and deaf. And what they had instead was the asterisk ground asterisk, a sense so exquisite that a Gret could tell a walking thing from a running thing at 200 meters through solid basalt, and could navigate a plane it had never crossed by the feel of its own echo coming back off the rock. Which meant that, when a wall of ash 600 meters high began to hammer the northern shield at 90 kilometers an hour, the ground of the entire ashland started screaming. The herd had turned into the noise, because the noise was everywhere, because there was no direction that was not the noise, and they had begun to move, and they were moving south-southwest asterisk, and Wren Sotelo had spent 4 days looking at this country, and she knew, with a cold and total certainty, exactly what was south-southwest. The sink, 11 kilometers of flat lava glass, no shelter, no lee, nothing to break the wind for 40 kilometers in any direction. They were walking into the scouring. 11 Gret, and the old cow with the scarred plate, and the calf. Wren stood with her shovel in her hand and her 40 minutes evaporating, and she said, out loud to nobody, in a voice that shook, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." And then she started walking east. She could not stop them. That was the first thing she made herself understand, standing in the rising wind with the grit already beginning to tick off her goggles. Each of those animals massed 11 tons. She could not push one, or turn one, or frighten one, and there was no weapon in her pack, because her pack contained a knife, a rope, a shovel, and a stick. But they could not see her either. They had never seen anything. They had no picture of the world at all, only the ground, and the story the ground told, and the story the ground told was written in asterisk rhythm. And there was one thing, one single, ridiculous, useless thing, that Wren Sotelo's species could do better than any creature that had ever lived on any world in the conquered, and had been able to do since before it had language, before it had fire, before it had anything at all. Humans could keep a beat. She got out ahead of the leading cow at a dead run. The only real running she did that entire day, 800 meters of it, and it very nearly finished her. And she got 200 meters off the herd's left shoulder and dropped to one knee in the black grit, and jammed the butt of the thornwood stick into the ground, and began to drum. Not randomly. She had been listening to Gret for 4 days, and she had noticed a thing on day 3 and thought about it for 9 hours lying on a ridge. The way the herd bunched away from an asterisk hard, sharp, fast asterisk vibration, the signature of stone falling, of a slope letting go. So she made a slope let go. Crag, 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 crag. 200 meters out on their left, a piece of the world said asterisk danger in the only language they had. The leading cow shied right, 4 degrees. 4 degrees. Wren picked up her stick and ran 40 meters and knelt, and did it again. Crag, 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 crag. 3 degrees. She was a human being with a stick, in the dark, in a rising storm, and she was going to turn 11 11-ton animals 90 degrees, 4 degrees at a time, across 14 kilometers of open plain, and she checked her chrono with Grit sanding the face of it, about 9 hours before the front hit properly. It took 11. The 19 went out of the gate at 15:20, into the teeth of it. They went out in a formation that did not exist in any academy manual, because Silashan had invented it in the corridor in about 40 seconds and had done it out loud, which was itself unprecedented. The Draka went in front, because Draka were 400 kilos of low-slung armored bulk and could stand in a wind that would take a Threshy off the ground and fold her. The Threshy went asterisk behind asterisk them, in the wind shadow, walking, for the first time in their lives on their feet, which they hated, which they did anyway. The Silkwest ran the flanks in a rotating relay, so that no runner would be in the front of the wind long enough to burn out. And Silashan had gotten that idea from watching a human hand a canteen to a Draka in a courtyard 11 weeks before. And Nith of the Noct walked in the center, alone, with her forelimbs on the ground. Because in an ashfall you could not see, and you could not hear, and you could not smell, and every sense that had made every one of them the apex of their world was all at once, all together, completely, uselessly asterisk blind. Except one. Nith could feel the ground. And 200 kilometers away, somewhere out in the black, something was walking. Crunch, 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 crunch. At exactly the same cadence, in exactly the same rhythm, at exactly the same interval, hour upon hour, like something that had been wound. That way, said Nith of the Noct, and pointed with one thin pale limb into the storm. And 19 apex predators put their heads down and followed a mammal's footsteps into the dark. She turned them at the 9th hour. Wren Sotelo did not remember most of the 11th. She remembered pieces. The ash coming in horizontally, the goggles clogging every 8 minutes so she had to stop and clear them with a thumb that had stopped having feeling in it, the stick splitting at the base and getting shorter and shorter as she cut it back with the knife. The calf falling behind twice, and both times Wren dropping back with it and drumming a soft, close, asterisk this way against the rock until the little idiot came. Because it had been born 4 months ago, and had never in its short life felt a rhythm that was patient with it. She remembered, somewhere around hour 7, understanding that she was not going to be able to dig a scrape afterward. There would not be time. There would not be strength. When the herd was in the lee of the Blackspine, the long lava ridge she was walking them toward, 11 kilometers of basalt that would break the wind for anything behind it, she would be out in the open, with nothing, in the full front of an ashfall. She thought about that for about 100 meters. Then she got up and moved 40 meters and knelt and drummed. Crag, 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 crag. 2 degrees. They found her at 410 in the black, 4 kilometers short of the Blackspine. Nith felt her first, felt the footfalls, and then felt them stop asterisk, which was the single most horrifying thing that had ever happened to her, because for 11 weeks those footfalls had been the one fixed point in Nith's universe, the thing that did not vary, and they had gone silent, and Nith went down onto all 8 limbs and pressed her forelimbs flat to the rock, and drummed the alarm of her people into the ground with everything she had. Torvath got there first because he ran, and he ran because he was Draka, and Draka were the fastest thing in that storm over 400 meters, and because at some point in the last 11 weeks, the arithmetic in his chest had quietly rearranged itself, and he no longer had a choice about it. He found her on her knees. She was still drumming. Her arm was going. She had been drumming for 11 hours and the stick was down to a stub, and her hand was bleeding into the grit, and she did not appear to be entirely conscious. And when the enormous shape came out of the ash in front of her, she looked up at it with the blank white face of somebody 2 hours past the end of themselves and said, "Not yet, 4 more clicks. I've nearly got them." Torvath of the Draka knelt down in the ash in front of the human. "Yes," he said, "you have got them, we will do the last 4. And he took the stub of the stick out of her hand, and he turned around and roared into the storm, and 19 cadets came out of the ash. The board hearing, 3 weeks later, would spend most of a day on what happened next, and the record is unusually good, because Nith had switched her leg log to record without being asked, and it captured all of it, in tremor, in the dark. The Draka drummed. 4 of them, spaced 200 meters apart, hammering the ground on the herd's left flank with tails that could break stone. A rhythm a human had taught them in 90 seconds by beating it out on a Draka's forearm with the flat of her hand, over and over, until they had it. The Silkwes ran the line, carrying the timing between drummers, because you cannot see in an ashfall and the beat must be asterisked together or it is not a beat. It is just noise. Silashan ran that relay for 4 kilometers in a storm at 40 kilometers an hour, and never dropped a count. The Threshy went up, into a wind that hated them, one at a time, 20 seconds at the top of it, just long enough to look down through a break in the ash and shout the herds heading to the ground before the wind slapped them out of the sky. 3 of them did it 11 times each. It was the most undignified thing any Threshy had ever done with wings, and they would talk about it for the rest of their lives. And Nith walked in the middle with her limbs on the rock and counted the herd asterisk, all 11, every step, and told them when one drifted. And Wren Sotelo, who could not stand, was carried on Torvath's back and told them what to do next. They put the Gret behind the Blackspine at 6:40, 11 of 11, with the calf, 20 minutes before the front came through. Then they dug in 19 cadets and 1 human in a scrape in the lee of a lava ridge, packed together in the dark under a folding shovel's worth of grit and a Draka's back for a roof, breathing each other's air for 11 hours while Kesh took its temper out on the world above them. And at some point in the middle of it, Wren Sotelo, half-conscious, hoarse, wrapped in a Threshy's wing and a Silkwes's flank, and the ridiculous shared warmth of 6 species who had never in 400 years been that close to each other without a scoring rubric, started, quietly, to hum. And Silashan of the Silkwes, who would command a fleet one day, lay in the dark and listened to it and thought, so that is what it is for. They came home on the 6th day, out of a plane that had been scoured to glass, walking. Wren had refused to be carried the last 11 kilometers, and there had been an argument, and the argument had been lost by the Draka, who was extremely put out about it. Provost Sathay Vern was on the wall. The gate came up. The cohort came in, 20 of them, gray with ash, walking in step, which nobody had told them to do, and which they had been doing for 4 hours without noticing. "Cadet Sotelo," said Provost Vern, and her voice, for the first time in 30 years, was not entirely level. "You went out under the original specification. You have returned. The charter requires that I ask." She held out one hand. "The marker patch." Wren stopped. She turned out her pockets. She turned out her pack. She held out both hands, empty, palms up, fingers open, that defenseless human configuration, the one Torvath had stared at on the first night, and in the center of her right palm there was nothing at all. "I don't have it, ma'am," she said. Vern closed her eyes. "Then the trial is." "It's on the old cow," said Wren. "Left flank under the scar plate." Silence on the wall. "That is not possible," said Provost Vern. "You did not have a stalk in you. You had been walking for 11 hours. Nith's log shows you on your knees at 4 kilometers. Nobody, no asterisk cadet asterisk, no asterisk instructor asterisk. Nobody in the history of this academy has ever put a patch on a Gret in a storm, in the open, without cover after." She stopped. Commandant Vosk Thren came down off the wall, 3.5 meters of ambulatory geology, moving very slowly. "Cadet," he said, "how did you get within touching distance of a Gret?" Wren Sotelo looked up at him. She was 19 years old. She was gray to the eyebrows and there was blood dried on her right hand, and she had been awake for 51 hours. "I didn't, sir," she said. "Explain." "I walked with them for 4 days. Her voice was a ruin. I ate when they ate. I slept when they slept. I moved when they moved. I never came at them, not once, not from any angle, and after a while the ground stopped saying asterisk stranger when I walked on it and started saying. She shrugged and swayed slightly, and Torvath's hand came up behind her without either of them appearing to notice, started saying asterisk her. And then I turned them out of the sink, and they didn't know it was me, and it doesn't matter that they didn't know it was me. And when the storm broke this morning, and they came out from behind the ridge. She stopped. Her eyes were doing the leaking thing again. She walked over, Wren said, the old one with the scar. She walked over to where I was sitting and she put her head down and she stood there for about a minute. Her jaw worked. So I patted her, ma'am. And then I remembered the patch. Nobody on that wall said anything for a long time. I didn't get within touching distance of a gret, said Wren Sotelo. She got within touching distance of asterisk me asterisk. I think that might be the whole thing, actually. I think that's the entire difference between your people and mine, and I've been trying to explain it for 11 weeks, and I never had the words until right now. She swayed. Sir, she said to Commandant Thren, may I please sit down? The board sat for 4 days. Provost Sathai Vern resigned on the 2nd, in writing, in language of great dignity, and she was not disgraced. And the last thing she did before she left Kesh was to walk down to the main gate at dawn, stand under the carving, read it one more time, and then request formally that it be changed. Because she had watched Nith's log. She had watched 19 apex predators go into an ashfall for a mammal with no teeth. She had watched a threshy throw herself 11 times into a wind that could kill her, simply to be useful. She had watched the whole magnificent doctrinal edifice of 400 years get quietly and completely dismantled by a 19-year-old with a stick. And she had realized, standing at the window, that she had spent 30 years teaching young people that the apex stands alone, and that it had never once occurred to her to ask why, in 400 years, no apex species in the Concord had ever built a asterisk starship asterisk, or a asterisk city asterisk, or an asterisk academy asterisk, and why every one of them had joined a Concord whose logistics were quietly being run, within 9 years of their arrival, by a species of tool-using, water-sharing, distance-throwing, endlessly walking primates. The carving over the gate at Kesh reads, today, in 9 languages, and it says, the apex endures, and it does not endure alone. There is a story they tell at the academy now, to every intake on the first night in Barracks 9. A new cadet, a Draka, big, scarred, entirely certain of himself, asked Instructor Torvath about it in the 9th year, the way new cadets always do, with the particular sneer of somebody who has heard a rumor and intends not to be impressed by it. They say the cadets were asterisk afraid asterisk of her, he said. Of a human, a mammal. He clicked his throat. Is it true, Instructor? Were you frightened? And Instructor Torvath of the Draka, who was very large now and gray along the jaw, and who had a canteen on his belt that was 90 years old and had a human name scratched into the base of it, looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. The cadet blinked. Not of her teeth, said Torvath. She had none. Not of her claws, or her speed, or her strength, because she had none of those either, and I could have broken her across my knee on any day of the first month, and we both knew it. He turned and looked out the slot in the wall, east, toward the bowl and the spine and the long black plain beyond them. I was frightened because on the day I met her I knew exactly what the world was and where everything in it stood, and 11 weeks later I did not, and she had never once raised a hand to me. That is what she does. That is what they all asterisk do, and I have met a great many of them since, and it is always the same. He showed every tooth in his head, which by then the whole academy understood to be a smile. She did not beat me, cadet. She simply kept walking, and she carried her water, and she made a bridge, and she came back for me when I was down, and she did it for 11 weeks without once complaining. And at the end of it I discovered that I had changed my mind about the shape of the universe, and I could not tell you the hour it happened. He picked up the old canteen and turned it over in his hand. "There is a word in my language," he said, "for prey that keeps walking after it should have lain down. It was an insult once. My grandfather used it that way." He set the canteen down. "Now it is what we call the thing at the top." And in the yard below, the wind came off the bowl and hit the ridge and did its best, as it had done for 400 years. And somewhere out there past the sensor line, a long way east under a bruise-colored sky, a very old Gret with a scar across her armor was walking her herd across the black, wearing a faded orange patch on her flank that nobody had ever taken off, at exactly the pace of something that had learned once in a storm that the thing walking beside it in the dark had no intention of ever stopping, and had never, not once, been coming for her.